Hey everyone, welcome to this week's episode of our podcast. Is breakfast included? How you guys doing? Good? That's great. Today on the show, I have a really cool guest, my friend Fred Burke. Now, Fred jumped on this tour as a sub-tech. Our guy had to go off and fulfill some commitments. Fred came in. We got to know each other. He's a really interesting guy. I asked him if he'd sit down and talk to me, and it was basically just a really great conversation between two roadies. Anyway, we got into his personal life, we got into his professional life, and we got into whatever's gonna happen. Anyway, I hope you dig it. Fred's a really cool guy. Let's check it out.
Let's try it and see what we do. See how embarrassing this is.
All right, man.
Yeah?
Introduce yourself.
Hey, Bernie. Thanks for having me. I'm Fred Burke. I'm a backline tech, and I'm a backline tech with you for this next few weeks on Duran Duran, and I'm covering the guitar gig for Phil, who's away. And it was great to be asked, and it's nice to be here. A lot of nice people. Yeah. So we didn't have that much time before we came out to do this. We had some rehearsal, which was brief. But it all seemed to settle in nicely. It was you know, when you walk into some gigs and it's just good instantly. Yeah, it felt that way.
Oh, right on, man.
So it was everybody wanted to give a bit, which was nice because it's, you know, when you come into something new, even if it's just brief, you want to do the best you can. And
well, we usually try and make the new guy feel welcome before we attack him with the pillowcase full of bars of soap on the last night. Thought I'd give you a heads up.
Just so you know, you won't be making that flight home.
You might be a little bumped up.
Yeah.
Where are you from, man?
I'm from Dublin in Ireland. Born in Dublin, live in Dublin now. When I'm home, I mean, I have a house there, but I think like a lot of crew, when you're on the road for a long time, there's a place called home that you go to.
It's just a mailing address.
Yeah, right? It is that.
Yeah.
But then a lot of time, the mailing address for you is the hotel you're in at any particular time. And you're looking at the itinerary going, oh, well, where am I? Yeah, okay, I'm there. And you get stuff sent to the hotel. And you do that. Oddly, I did notice, I don't know if this is commonplace now more often in the US, where hotels are charging you
to receive mail. Anyway, if you go to Vegas, sometimes it's $50 to get something delivered, mailed to you.
Wow.
I had some strings or something mailed. I had to pay $50. This was a few years back, but it was $50 back then, so I can imagine what they're doing now.
I stayed in one hotel and they had I think it was a FedEx office in the hotel. Yeah. And that's where you had to go, and you were paying FedEx rates to receive your mail, you know, to the hotel or whatever it was. Even if it was an Amazon delivery, they wouldn't take it. And sometimes you don't want to send it to the venue, and, you know, the production assistant says, no, don't do that, because you don't know whether it's going to arrive or the person.
It gets lost. But they'll say, I send it to your hotel and then pay $50, but don't give us a receipt.
Yeah, thanks.
Anyway, man, you're from Dublin. How long have you been doing what we do?
34 years this year.
34 years.
Since I left school.
What did you do before that?
I didn't really. I left school and I had some jobs over that summer. And I had a friend who was a few years older than me, but I knew him when I was in school, and he was a guitar tech. Mm-hmm. And I never really had any thoughts of doing this, but we then hung out, you know, when I left school, and we used to go to bars together, and he would talk about the gigs he was doing and introduce me to people he worked with, and then he started having multiple shows on a nightly basis. So we might have an early show, a mid-evening show, and a late show after midnight. Mm-hmm. And he was trying to get to all of them. And I started bringing his second case or his third tool case. Yeah. And then I started setting up for him as much as I could. Yeah. And learned that way until I started getting my own shows.
Yeah. Were you a musician before this? So you just kind of fell into it.
Yeah. But I'm technical. I'm good that way. Yeah. I'm good mechanically. And back then, at least, you know, in Ireland and the UK, it was more about that, because it seemed then and maybe it's just when you're starting out and, bands don't have money. Equipment broke more often.
Yeah.
So you needed to know how to fix things.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of that. I did a lot of running repairs and repairs during shows, and the gig seemed to be more about that then than it is now. There's more emphasis on, I think, being able to play now than there was then.
Yeah. I think a couple of guys that I know who are A-level techs, they don't play. And they say, I've never learned to play. It's not part of my gig.
Yeah. But it wasn't then.
Yeah, it wasn't. It was just about doing the gig.
Yeah. And kind of being able to, when something went wrong, knowing the gear inside out, which is more difficult now. Because, with electronic equipment, I in the early days of teching, I did a course in electronics. Mm-hmm. And back then, you could repair things. You could take resistors off boards and you could...
If you were good with the soldering iron, you could do it. Yeah.
Yeah. But now boards are surface mounted. All the components are surface mounted. You don't repair them. You take them out and you put a new one in.
Yeah.
You might get away with a fuse blowing. That's about the only thing you can really repair now. Yeah, change valves. Yeah. So there's less of that now.
Yeah.
So we now end up having backups for everything.
Yeah.
You have a second or a third unit that we carry with us.
We have backups to our backups.
Yeah.
And then
redundancy for redundancy.
Yeah.
And we're fearful without it.
Oh.
And
I
switching
have nightmares
systems.
about it.
Nightmares about it. Don't we all? When you're doing a big gig, and you mentioned the other day, we were starting out on this. You were saying for a show before it, I'm a bit nervous, and it's odd to think that I still feel that way. This amount of years afterwards as well, I still get that.
Yeah, folks think I'm joking when I go.
Yeah.
I'm nervous.
Yeah.
Like it's the first show, and it could be the 5th show or the 20th show of a tour, and I get nervous.
Yeah, but you've been doing it long enough to know that. Forgive me, shit can go wrong.
Yeah,
and it does.
Yeah, it's rock and roll, man.
Yeah.
We talked about this earlier.
Yeah.
Like, there's guys that go from point A to point B to point C because they know shit goes wrong, and then there's cats that come out that know how to get from point A to point C.
Yeah, and nowhere in between.
No,
it goes in there and it comes out there, but what happens there, I just don't know.
Yeah.
I'm interested in what happens there. I need to know what happens there.
Yeah, and I'm always trying to learn.
Yeah.
I've never been in the mindset that I know it all.
Yeah.
Like even the stuff I know, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm covering guitars on this gig at the moment, and guitars for a long time was my main gig, and then I fell into doing drums, and I've done drums for a long time. And on the drum gig particularly, I've noticed over the past number of years, I learn something new every day still on a drum gig. Every day. And people think that's strange. They think it's drums. What can you learn about? Every day there's something new about, how the room changes, how your tuning changes, how... There's just something that happens. And it's usually something small where you go, that's what that does.
Yeah.
Or this affects that way. And you learn from it. And I buzz off that. And it's one of the great enjoyments for me of doing it is... I got something new out of it today, and drum will come in and say, "Wow, that sounds great." I go, "Yeah, but," and you share what you know.
This is what I did.
Yeah, and with the guys, and there's some guys on crew who aren't interested. You just said there's guys that aren't interested in the bit in the middle.
Yeah,
and there are people like you who are. And for those who are interested, we all get something from it. You go, oh, really? Does that do it? And it's a bit geeky. I know it's geeky.
Yeah, you learn something, and then you do that gig, and you're like, I hope it goes wrong because I know how to fix it now.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. You don't want it to go wrong, really.
Yeah.
But you're like, if it does, I'm confident I know how to fix it. Yeah. Because I figured
and you
that
do
out.
get really involved in it.
Yeah.
And more so, we all listen for different things. And things have changed since we're all now on in-ears. And we listen to the show differently now. I used to have a little monitor speaker. Beside we have in-ears now. We've spoken earlier. My main gig is Hosier, and I look after bass and drums on Hosier, and the two backing vocalists as well. They have their own little setup. But Rory, who's the drummer there, he has a lovely Black Beauty snare, really, really beautiful. There's something about this particular snare that's, I don't know. It's like particular guitars. You know, you can get 50 Telecasters and you'll get one that really is that special Telecaster. And this snare is something special. But my ears are tuned to knowing when that goes out of tune. More so than the drummer.
Yeah.
And I can hear it more than he. I have his mix.
Yeah.
And I'll go out. And he's so used to me doing it between songs that I can go out and go behind him and he'll be sitting on the stool and be underneath him, tuning it between songs. And he's cool. And he won't flinch.
Yeah.
And you probably won't see me go out during a show to do it. But that's kind of how involved you get in a gig at times. When it's yours, when you've built it. And I built his rig and all the hardware now has changed and the way the kit is set up and the way he plays has changed because he was struggling. He had some physical issues. So we needed to make him sit up straighter as he was playing.
Yeah.
And to make him comfortable because he plays his kit jazz style. It's low and the snare sits away from him, tilted forwards. But he was leaning over and that wasn't good. So we needed to figure all that out and the ergonomics of his playing, which is difficult when somebody's been playing for a long time because it's hard to change.
Yeah, it is.
So I enjoy that. I enjoy getting that involved in it.
Yeah, well, I mean...
And I think it kind of requires that now.
It does. That's really,
you can't be casual about it.
You can't just hang out and lay out the lines of coke and wait for your guy to come. It's not about that anymore. It's about learning your guy. Yeah. I joke with people. And tell them like I know different looks that my guy gives me. Yeah. If he looks over at me, I know, okay, he needs this. Or he wants a soda on it. The other night, he came over and I was like, oh, you want a Diet Coke? Yeah. Let's go back to Ireland. How did your parents feel when you started doing this? Did they want you to be like a doctor, lawyer? Did they want you to go to university or any of that?
Okay, so it's odd that you asked that. I grew up with my dad. My folks split when we were quite young. I was 7. And myself and my sister, who's 2 years younger, we grew up with my dad. And that dynamic at that time in Ireland was kind of difficult for him and for us. And caused its own issues in school. So I out of necessity, I grew up really quick because my dad was away working outside of... He wasn't home really Monday to Friday.
Yeah.
So as a kid, I grew up very quick and I was looking after my sister and making sure she was fed and her school uniform was earned and those kinds of things. And just kind of running the household at a very young age. And then when his job had him back such that he was home in the evenings, I was about 14. And I went kind of wild. I was that wild teenage kid for a few years. Sorry, just to go back to the school thing and how this references. When you're in that situation where you kind of grow up fast and you've been given responsibility and you're being treated like an adult at home.
Yes. But
you're being treated like a kid in school. That for me caused issues, I think. Now, I didn't realize that at the time. It took me a long time afterwards thinking back on it and wondering. So I wasn't good with being told what to do when I was the one making the decisions on a daily basis at home. So, that caused issues at school. And only recently, I'm 52 this year, I've had a conversation with my best friend about this. And I don't know why we never spoke of it. But I didn't have a plan when I was in school of where to go after. And they all did. Like he did and some of the other guys did. And they kind of went, oh, yeah, I want to do this and I want to go to college. And college wasn't an option for me either way because we didn't have the money.
Yeah.
There was no money at home. And I couldn't have approached my dad we just didn't have money. Historically, this might be important relative to men of that time in Ireland and the influence of the Catholic Church in Ireland. When my dad and my mother split up, he had a government job in the civil service in Ireland. And he then had told them that the marriage had broken down and for tax reasons, you kind of had to if they weren't living in the same house together. So he was then deemed a single man and taxed as a single man. And because of the influence of the Catholic Church in Ireland then, if you were taxed as a single man, you got no taxable allowance for children. So the amount of take-home pay he had reduced significantly.
Wow.
So it was always a struggle. And, we didn't have money. I had my first job when I was 9, and always had a job, through my teen years, because I couldn't go and get pocket money or, it was just, I needed to do things. I forgot my train of thought. Where were we going with this? Anyway, so my folks. And so by the time I was leaving school, even if we had the money to send me to college, I didn't want to go.
Yeah.
It was just more school to me. And I was used to working and I wanted to work. So the first summer when I left school, I worked for a guy by the name of Jim Brady. And Jim Brady was a law searcher. And I was a bicycle courier for his law searching firm. Which was great because I'd raced bikes in my teens, and I got to do that all day. I got to be on my bicycle all day, and Jim paid me really well for what I was doing, and I liked working for him. And on Friday evenings, he'd take us all out. There weren't many people in the office, and he'd take us either dinner or drinks, and it was a nice place to be. And then shortly after that, as we started out, I mentioned my friend who was in the business, and I was kind of hanging on to his coattails and learned the hard way. And back then in Dublin, there were so many little clubs and places to do gigs, upstairs, top room over a bar or whatever. Everybody seemed to be open to it. There was more of it.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of unemployment. So there were a lot of people playing music because they didn't have a job or trying to make it in the business. And a lot of A&R people came to Dublin because of U2, and were still hanging around at that time. But, there aren't many people who made it out of Ireland really afterwards. I mean, the Cranberries made it, and I'm trying to think of whoever. But, but a lot of bands were trying. So there were a lot of young indie bands, which is where I started out.
Yeah.
And it was...
The Frames.
The Frames were good,
yeah.
But
Frames
Glenn
are from Ireland, right?
Yeah. Glenn is from Dublin. So Glenn, for those who know the Frames, Glenn is the lead singer and he plays guitar. And Glenn was in a movie before that called The Commitments.
Yep.
Yeah, you know The Commitments.
Yeah.
And has since had a Broadway show.
Is it once, right?
Yeah. So that went really well. And then it was in London as well. So he's a Grammy winner, I think, as well, is he not?
He's a little bit of everything, Glenn, isn't he?
He is. He's done really well. And he still busks. You know, he still takes his guitar and he goes around Europe and you'll see him. I've been in the strangest of places on my day off and there's Glenn busking on the street. And that's his thing, man.
Yeah. I worked for an artist, Josh Ritter, who was very tight with Glenn. Saw him at an open mic night.
Okay.
In Boston. Said, you got to come to Ireland.
Yeah. Took
Josh to Ireland and people loved him.
Yeah.
Josh broke there in Ireland before he did in the US.
Great.
Yeah. But
I know Glenn is good friends with Eddie Vedder. And they've gigged together.
Yeah,
they've done an acoustic thing together.
Yeah.
And that's good. I got to meet Eddie a couple of times. A gig I was working on a few years ago, and very generous man. Really nice man.
Right on, man.
Huh?
I said right on.
Yeah.
What was the first when I say big, but what was the first gig that you got that you're like on a bus or in a van, like a real artist, like that had support?
Oh, well, in a van, I suppose. I mean, outside of Ireland would have been a band called Something Happens, and they were signed to Virgin initially, and then I think it was Universal. I might be wrong. I'm trying to remember who it was after Virgin, but I have in my head Universal. And they were popular on the college scene in the US. And this is sort of early, mid-90s. They lost their deal in 97. And I was kind of in and out of it. I wasn't with them constantly, but for the last few years and up until the point where the deal lapsed, I was there. And that was great. I mean, being that age and trying to make it work in the US, I was young enough and enthusiastic enough to be in a GMC van, with the last set of seats taken out and your backline in there and you're doing silly drives, from place to place to do clubs. But we were all young enough to do it and did. And there were 5 of them. And
the scene in the mid-90s was thriving.
Yeah, everywhere.
Like these college bands is what they were called. Like these college circuit bands, they were just everywhere.
Yeah.
But it happened, like you said, like these labels would sign all these bands and they just weed them out.
Yeah.
Look for the big next No Doubt or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
And as they were looking for that, these other bands just,
So we tried to do it. Some people seem to have bigger budgets than we did, or somebody was financing it. But we did it as tightly as we could. They were very open about what the money was, and as generous as they could be to me, because there was just me and a front of house guy who was usually trying to TM, PM it and drive. Or we'd share the drive, in fairness. And we'd get in, and much as I was the backline tech, they would help setting up gear.
Yeah.
And we'd sound check and then try and get some dinner and do a show.
But being a kid that wasn't wealthy from Dublin, Ireland, it had to be the best over in the U.S. touring.
Man,
maybe making 500 a week, maybe.
It was.
But you weren't starving.
No,
you were just.
Yeah,
I refer to us as carnies.
Yeah,
city to city,
Yeah. But I think you have that or you don't. Some people, we were talking about this previously, about people who can tour and people who can't. Yeah. And I think some people have it. And I've been with a lot of people who thought that's what they wanted to do and toured once and never wanted to do it again.
Yeah, I never, I was a musician. I fell into this business. I was very lucky. I've never looked back and said, I started on a bus, started with a headliner. I started on in-ears. Yeah. It was years before I had to, what do you mean you don't have in-ears? And I got to have a wedge over my Guitar World,
Yeah.
But along the way, I realized that growing up, all I ever wanted to do was travel. That's all I ever wanted to do. I used to say, like, I have this... What I know now as a 51-year-old man is a very nomadic heart. Like I can't, it's hard to settle down and not be like, I got to go somewhere. So when I started, I sponged. I was like a sponge, learning every little aspect, anything. But along the way, you meet people who really have a misconception about what we do. And it's
what we are and the type of people we are.
Exactly. You and I had this conversation. It's hard to just readjust back into.
But there's still that assumption, and I get it all the time from people who don't know, and they can't know. This is not their fault. They don't know that you've got everybody has a coke habit.
You must get a lot of chicks.
Yeah, and you're screwing around all the time, and
you party all the time.
You couldn't do the job.
No,
you couldn't.
I refer to backstage as Game of Phones.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, what it was like in the 70s, 80s, 90s, I can't tell you because I didn't do it then. So I can't speak for that. But what I can speak for is the text now.
Well, when I look back on it, when I was starting, it used to be 2 shows in a row, max, day off.
Yeah.
Then it went to 3 shows in a row. And I'm doing 4 shows in a row now. Sometimes 5 shows in a row.
Yeah, when I tour with Josh, it's 5 to 6 shows in a row.
Yeah. So you can't, maintain a habit.
No.
And I remember a time when there were certain people back then, I think most of them, if not all of them, are dead now, would go home owing the band money.
The advances.
Yeah, just for their coke habit.
Yeah.
And some very famous guitar techs for some very big bands. And I never wanted that.
No, I've never partaken in any type of
It also, I have to put my hand up, it doesn't really agree with me. My drug of choice would have been alcohol.
Yeah.
And there was a time in my life in the 90s where I was very good at alcohol. And it can do as much damage as anything.
Yeah.
And I certainly reached a point where I questioned myself and reined that all in.
Yeah.
And took a step back, and thankfully did.
Yeah.
Because I'd gone from that, when that band I mentioned, Something Happens, when their deal lapsed, and myself and the singer were actually sharing a house together at that time, so he didn't really have any money and I didn't, and we were looking for new things to do, and or other things to do. He got a radio gig one night a week in Dublin doing an Irish music show on a radio station, and that developed for him, and he's still in radio now.
Yeah.
And I went on looking for other work, and I ended up working for Riverdance, and that meant I was back out on the road again for long lengths of time, but it was steadier work, and because I wasn't partying like I used to, I had my first house bought 3 years later.
Yeah.
Because the money was just going into the bank, and that's where my head was. And I'd reached that point in my life where I needed a bit of security.
Yeah.
That things start to change I think for people around that time, or they certainly did for me. And if you don't, I've noticed in life, get off at that point. If you don't leave the party at that point, it's not going to go well.
No. Yeah, someone told me early on, like, try and save all your money, because you don't. This industry is feast or famine.
Yeah, I bumped into a man in South Africa who was probably my age at the time, and I was a young kid, and I was still kind of. It was only ever alcohol, and he kind of had a word with me and said, "Man, if you want to stay doing this,
slow down."
Yeah.
Going back to the what we were talking about, people. There are people who can tour. There are people who are not. People don't understand what we do. What is the in your opinion the biggest misconception about what we do? Like from the public, from an outside world of what we do.
I think there's a notion of glamour across the industry that really isn't there. For a lot of us, crewing, you start backline crewing. That is, you start at 9 a.m. and you finish at midnight. Yeah, that's your day. You shower, you get back on the bus, and you do it somewhere else the next day, as far as the bus can drive.
Yeah, you
get off the bus and you do it again and again. The showtime is great. I still buzz off what happens at showtime. Yeah. Still, and during the lockdown period. Things I hadn't realized about what I get from it. I miss the period of changeover before the opener and the main. That air of expectancy that happens with the audience. You can feel it build.
Yeah, you can hear. Yeah. You can feel the anticipation.
Yeah.
I
miss that, and it's great to be back doing it. To feel that, and it was one of those things I never realized was there, but until it was gone. So I miss those things, but. Misconceptions, I think, as you say, the notion that still pervades that we all do a lot of drugs and whatever. There's lots of girls and that it's glamour and then outside of that, I don't know that people think about it a lot, but I think they don't know they don't really know what we are.
Yeah. Or what I get a lot. Oh, you're the guy that tunes the guitars.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah,
and then you can't go into saying, well. Yeah, but no. I often tell people, well, I'm like a caddy to my guy. Like I kind of do everything for him and, make sure that he doesn't have to worry about anything but swinging that golf club.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. That's better than, from the drum tech point of view, most people don't even know you tune drums.
Yeah.
So, You can do that?
What do you mean? How do you tune them? They don't have knobs.
Yeah.
They don't have the tuners.
Yeah. So, that's...
Do you prefer being a guitar tech or a drum tech?
They're two completely different jobs.
Yeah. Which one do you enjoy the most? Or are they...
I'm probably... because I've been doing the drum thing for quite a while now, I'm more settled there now.
Yeah.
But at the moment, doing guitars... I'm kind of buzzing off doing guitars again, and I'm enjoying that and remembering what that was.
Yeah.
I've probably been more involved in what happens with drumming, though, in that I get to design rack systems. I have a bit of a relationship with DW for hardware, and I kind of got let loose with doing that for certain drummers.
Yeah.
And had some briefs to. I had one particular brief for a gig with a drummer and a big artist where they wanted to do more corporate shows, but the drum setup was wider than an 8x8 riser, but they couldn't, for most of those corporate things, it has to fit on a max 8x8 riser. So I needed to get his setup onto that, that blueprint. And that was a bit of a challenge, and did that in conjunction with DW. And that worked really well for them. And it was I enjoyed doing it.
Yeah.
Because I only had it in my head. It was UK based artist, but I set up a day in a rehearsal room in London, and Backline rental company was there as well, and I called in some favors, and whatever racking they had, I mocked up what I had in my head as best I could for him.
Yeah,
but it was as best I could because what I had in my head, let's say a bar, a sidebar or a crossbar on a rack system is 3 feet long. I only wanted it 1.5 feet long. So I'd have to cut all these bars to make them into what I wanted. So I could only explain it to him as much as possible. And he went with it straight away. But man, if you can do that, I'd really dig it, because he was visually, he wanted his kit to stay really traditional looking.
Yeah.
So he didn't want to leave stands.
Yeah.
And I had said to him I could more or less make a rack disappear.
Oh.
Such that you wouldn't see it. And he wanted, the brief as well for cymbals was he wanted stacked cymbals on straight stands, on straight, like boom arms straight up.
Yeah.
So as I say, I could only do it in my head, but I've done it long enough. I used to do Riverdance, as I mentioned earlier, and that was a massive. The percussion rig was, I think, the biggest touring perc rig in the world at the time, and 3 bars tall. So you'd had 2 sets of bars and then curved bars on the top. So trying to make that work and make it balance with all the weight on it was always a bit of a challenge. And then you had a double kick drum setup behind him for the drummer on a different rack system. So I know people have this vision in their head, well, certain drummers do, of that 80s rock rack system. And I've done that. I've done all of that. And you can do that. You can, people still want that occasionally. If you want to be Tommy Lee's tech, you can do that.
Neil Peart.
Yeah, Neil, there you go. I mean, God, how much money was spent on that, that circular thing. But I kind of went the other way. I wanted to minimize it as much as possible and to show how little you could use to get the same effect. Such that the focus, because drummers like this, the focus is on them, much as they want the gear. He wanted this traditional looking kit, but it was just 2 sidebars and legs, and everything came off that apart from the bit in the middle because it was a double kick setup. And I customized a system for him at the front that sat between the 2 kick drums, a 22 and a 24, but still had traditional cradles for the tom and the snare.
Yeah.
But they were connected and really stable to each other through a bar and a foot and a leg on the floor on each side, and then a cradle coming up out of them.
Wow. Can you mention the artist?
Do you want me to?
Yeah.
Okay, so it was Robbie Williams and it was Carl Brazil.
Oh, right on. Man.
Carl Brazil was the drummer.
Cool.
And that was interesting for me.
So you're a lefty. You're a southpaw.
Yeah.
How does it feel that 99% of the guitar playing world is right-handed? So pretty much it's the roll of the dice. You're always going to get a
Yeah.
right-handed guitar player.
Yeah. That's one of those things you learn to live with, and I have from the start.
I know in rehearsal I saw you put the guitar on and I go, what the
fuck is he doing? Yeah, upside down. Yeah. I come from a time where playing wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
At the start, it wasn't an issue. It is more of an issue now. Like people sound guys want you to be able to play.
Yeah.
You know, and more bands don't want a sound check. So they want the crew to sound check. Yeah. So it is more of an issue now. But the more the kids now that are, well, there seems to be a lack of kids coming through, have a greater ability to play than I ever did coming out of school.
Sometimes you get sometimes you cross paths on the road with those over-enthusiastic techs who all they want to do is play.
I was just going to get onto that, where I think that can be a failing, and I've certainly noticed guys who are more concentrated on what the guitar player is playing than on the gear, and not looking out for the things that are probably or maybe going wrong with the gear, because they're looking at it going, oh, he plays it that way, you know.
The story I told you earlier.
Yeah, and that's I kind of always and only thought of myself as a tech.
Yeah.
And my job was about the gear, and as you say, being, you know, that caddy to whoever it is you're looking after, the butler to that your guy or girl, and I'm good with that. That's where I'm happy. I feel comfortable there. I kind of know that, and I seem to fit into it naturally. I don't know what that is about anybody's personality, but because much as the audience looking on think it's the drummer's gear, or in my head it's my gear. He's playing it, right. You know.
Exactly. That's, you know, speaking of misconceptions, I get one of the biggest things about me is when I get off the road, people think I want to work on guitars. I want to, you know, it's not that I don't. And I tell you what it is. It's my lack of confidence. The guitars on this gig and any other gig that I do regularly, I just consider them my guitars. I know how they feel. I can set them up by just feeling the strings. I can tell what's going on with them. But if a stranger brings me their guitar, I'm terrified I'm going to scratch it. I don't know how he likes it played. I know how I like it played if I set it up and that's the big thing. And I was actually probably a couple years ago, a guy messaged me and said, "Oh, you know, I have a couple before we started playing Dingwalls, we played PV Cirrus. I have a couple of PV Cirrus. I know that you're John. I was wondering if you and I had to message him and go, I don't work on guitars when I'm home, and it sounded very dickish of me." And his response was like, "Oh, I thought you could help me out." And I felt really bad. And then I messaged him and I was like, no. I just don't like to mess with other people's guitars. But that is a big thing. I don't know if it's a struggle, but telling people like, no, I don't, you know, like.
For me, listening to you say it, because I know exactly where you're coming from, I think that's the responsible response.
Yeah.
Because it isn't a casual thing with an instrument when you make changes.
Yeah.
And it isn't always instantaneous. And, you know, we spoke earlier about resetting necks on guitars and you know, moving truss rods. Things move on guitars for a bit after that. And if you're familiar with an instrument, as you are, with what you have currently, then you know what's going to happen because you've done it and you're comfortable and you get there.
You know how weather affects what you have.
Yeah.
Like I if you put me on a gig with a bunch of Fender P basses, I mean I'll be fine, but you know I'm familiar with these Dingwall basses.
Yeah.
Because I've been around them for almost a year now, seeing how they acclimate to cold weather, hot weather. You know,
and that's the thing; they're all different.
How long the battery lasts?
Yeah,
you know,
well, that's even that for shows. Knowing that, having that little piece of information in your head about when you need to change it or even check it.
Yeah,
all those things are.
Like Phil, the guy that you're subbing for right now, asked me. He goes, "How many batteries do you need for this run?" And I go, "I don't know." I threw out a number, and he goes, "What?" And I go, "Why don't I don't change them every show?" And he goes, "Well, why not?" And I'm like, well, they go bad, but I start hearing them right around this time. So rather than waste it, and then I started hearing myself, and I go, get double that number.
Yeah, just in case.
Maybe I need them more.
Yeah.
But it's exactly what you said. Like I start hearing the volume drop. I start hearing things in the tone or in the sound in my ears, like, oh, those batteries need to be changed, and and then my mind starts playing tricks on me. Oh, he can hear it. He's gonna, he can hear that, and it, but. When, like you said, those are your drums, those are your guitars.
Well, in the same way, it's kind of nice to hear it reinforced from somebody, doing a different job on the gig. For me, with drums, there are tools and toys. I call them toys, things you can buy that will show you how to tune drums. Apparently,
yeah. The drum dial.
Right. So for guys, I know we don't have video here. I'm shaking my head.
Yeah.
Right. Yes, you can buy them and they do something. And they may get you close to it. But every single drum set kit I've ever worked on, I've had to learn. They're all different. They all sound different. They're all made different.
Yeah.
They all move differently. They're definitely affected, if they're wood, by temperature and moisture. And I have to learn them all. When I start something new, I take them apart completely and I start again. And I run around them with my hands and my fingers and I feel what the bearing edges are. I check to see how level they are. I've made my own tools for checking how round they are and for gauging them. And it's really important to understand, because if you're tuning it, or how people traditionally tune, it's almost like you're fighting against the instrument in the way people have that star-shaped tuning thing, and they think, I'll do that and I feel tension. That's, for me, not how you do it. Now, I have my own way of doing it.
Yeah. There could be someone listening going, this guy doesn't know what the fuck he's saying.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
But that's what works for you.
Yeah. But I suppose overall my point is that you do need to learn every show.
Yeah.
You need to be familiar with them in the same way you're familiar with the basses, because they are all different. And it's not generic.
You heard the other day at soundcheck. We had to go through every bass.
Yeah.
One was louder than all the others, but they're the same bass.
Yeah.
Same model, same pickup
somehow you've greater signal output.
One of them, and so they're not all the same.
Yeah.
I love what we do, man. I think we're very fortunate to do what we do for a living. I mean, we get to see the world on someone else's dime. We get to be part of putting on some great shows.
Yeah.
And we don't need the pat on the back.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like for us, I think you've just come into this gig, but we've hung out quite a bit. I think for us is like walking after the gig going, how was your gig? It's great. Yeah. We don't need the pat on the back. Like,
no.
Good show.
No. I think
if we can make it from opening track to that last note.
Yeah.
Without running out on stage and it's a successful note.
That has its own validation. It certainly does for me. Yeah. That notion of being places and being a part of some great things. And I've been lucky enough to have been a part of some great things, and it's stuff that money can't buy.
Yeah,
and stuff that keeps me warm.
Yeah,
I
think that's what a lot of people didn't understand about what. And I've tried to make it a point to not bring up 2020 anymore. And when I started this, I was like, last year, how'd you keep your? But a lot of people didn't understand why cats like us were, fell into depression or just, like I said, like even during the pandemic, I said, I'll start working on guitars at home. And that didn't fulfill me. I thought, well, maybe if I do something at home that reminds me of what I did. And
I just wanted to go back out.
It didn't. It wasn't even about the gig. Like you said, you missed the anticipation of the fans. I missed walking around. I missed walking halls in arenas.
Yeah.
Just looking around. I missed the load in. I missed the load out. I missed just being around people that I love and that I know have. People in your life will tell you they have your back. They'll tell you, if you need something, I'm here. But they weren't fucking there.
No. You're
Fred.
right. Yeah, yeah.
But the people out here,
Yeah.
you know they have your
Yeah.
back. You know?
Because we have to have it for each other.
Yeah, and you know they had your back then.
Yeah.
You know, Kevin called me every day.
Wow.
Every day we spoke or we texted.
Yeah.
You know, people that I've known all my life didn't reach out to me till another show was announced in 2021. And, oh, are you going to be there? Can I get tickets? You know? And I hadn't, you know. So that's what I'm saying. Like, the people in your life who say you have your back, they don't have your back. You know who has your back.
Yeah.
You know, but people like us, roadies, and I'll refer to us as roadies.
Yeah, I still do myself.
You know, we have each other's back.
Yeah.
And that's, people don't get that.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to be part of this fraternity of people that do, that know that feeling.
Yeah.
You know?
And maybe that is the intangible part of it, and the bit that's hard to explain, and that makes it easier for us to be around each other than, because I know for me, I said to you earlier that I find it difficult constantly having to explain what I do and how I do and where I go, and then treading that line between explaining what you do and not sounding patronizing, egotistical about, you know, well, I was in LA last week, and then I was in Tokyo, and then I was whatever. Yeah. It's not my fault that I was in those places. Yeah. It's just the job. Yeah. That's what you do. So you tend not to say that to people. But my mother still,
or imposter syndrome.
She's well in her 70s now. Still sends me jobs that she thinks are real jobs. You know.
I'll say this. My mom still thinks I'm just hanging out with my friends in the band.
Yeah.
She has no clue what I do. Yeah.
Mine the same. She nods her head, and you know.
I call her. I said, "Hey, I'm going to be in the UK and Europe till July." Okay, or she would say, "Okay, mijo."
Yeah.
And then she calls me a week later. Are you back yet? Nope. You know, it's they don't get it.
Yeah.
And then this new generation, I say new generation, like they don't want to be called a roadie. They want to be called a tech.
They come out of college now.
That I'm a fucking roadie, man.
Yeah.
I like I said, I crossed paths early on with a lot of old school roadies, and they like, be proud of that. If this is what you want to do.
Yeah.
You know,
own it.
Yeah, I'm a roadie.
I and this conversation has been had numerous times with people. They have, for want of a better term, rock and roll college now, where the kids go and do that, and they pay a lot of money to be whatever it is they teach them to be there. And they've never done a gig. And they don't know what that is. And I've had people over the years, because I'm of an age now where I have a stepson who's 32. So I went through that period of my life where people had kids of a certain age leaving school and, you know, wanted to be whatever they wanted to be. And if they wanted, for whatever reason, to be somebody like me, and their parents would go, "Oh, what should I do?" I used to give them the number of a friend of mine, John, who was the monitor engineer in a theatre, in the Olympia Theatre in Dublin. Mm-hmm. And I said, look, if they really want to do it, give me a call first and use that number after, and I'll ring John, and they can show up next Monday morning or whenever it is, knock on the stage door, and work there for a month for nothing.
Learn how to roll cables, learn how to patch the stage.
Learn the dynamics of the job. See what it actually is, because knowing what your place is and when you should open your mouth and when you should just shut up is
which we were talking about earlier.
But that is so important to what we do.
Yeah.
And learning what that interaction is and the politics of it, because there's a lot of that that you just don't know until you have to learn it. And that, for me, was the best education I could give you, because John, my friend, is the loveliest man. And you would learn more there than 2 years in college. Yeah. I guarantee you would. And you'd see how it all works and how the lighting guys get on with the audio guys and the audio guys get on with the backline techs, and how we all do that little dance together. And we all have to be equally respectful of each other. Mm-hmm. And when we're not, how that kicks off and how it gets resolved or doesn't. All those things you don't learn in college.
No.
And you won't.
I'm sure you've experienced this, you know, having to go at your audio guy and then by sound check, everything's cool.
Yeah.
Because it was just it's not an argument. It's not personal.
But I mean, loadout is, for me, I've been lucky enough that I've done big enough shows that I've done stadiums, where it looks like chaos and sounds like it too. But it's organized chaos, and everybody knows what they're doing.
It's a dance.
Yeah, and at times people kick off. It gets loud, and somebody takes down a bar trussing when they shouldn't have too early or whatever it is, and people shout at each other and they scream at each other. But you have to let that go because we're around each other 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
As we said, sometimes for 5 shows in a row now, which means you're on a bus and you're seeing the same people day in, day out, and you can't. You have to learn to let it go. You just have to.
Yeah. Because you're not, and they're not screaming at you. They're screaming at the moment.
Yes.
Yes.
It's not personal.
No.
It's something that gets resolved. And
I remember after my first loadout, walking away, going, "That guy screamed at me," and they're like, "Dude, don't worry about it. He just likes to scream."
Yeah.
But
and
me walking away thinking, like, what did I do wrong? Like, they're going to fire me. I'm still walking into every gig here 17 years later going, I'm going to get fired tonight.
Well, I say to people, and people laugh still about, did you have a good show? And my response is, I didn't get fired. It's always a good day when you don't get fired.
Exactly, right?
And that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah. Well, man, I appreciate you sitting down with me, man.
I enjoyed it. This was cool. I've never done this before.
Well, cool, man.
Welcome to Bernie's podcast. Great. This was good.
Which brings me to my final question. Yeah. My podcast, it's called Is Breakfast Included?
Okay.
And if it was included, Fred, what would you have for breakfast?
Oh, well, above everything else, it's tea for me, black tea. I have a little container with my tea in it that goes everywhere with me. And people kind of know me, people who do know me, they'll refer to me as Fred, the guy with the tea, because it goes everywhere, the little container. So tea, I have my tea in the morning.
That's a first.
Yeah.
That's a first. Everyone always goes, it's very gluttonous, that answer.
Yeah. No, tea, and I drink a horrendous amount of tea, but yeah.
I know, man.
It's strong black tea.
Well, it's been a pleasure having you out here on the road with us. And,
I do appreciate that. And it's been great being here.
Yeah, like I said, I wish we could think of something else you could do out here to stick around for the rest of this.
Yeah, but we'll catch up.
Yeah, for sure.
When we're all out doing a bit more. And
I'm sure we'll cross paths again.
I'll be in the States later in the year, and hopefully we'll get to do that.
All right, brother. Well, thanks a lot.
Thank you, man. I much appreciate it.
Right on. Fred Burke, guitar, bass, drum tech, backline guy extraordinaire. Fred's one of those rare people who has no social media footprint. Good on him. He'll be out this year with Hosier. Maybe you'll cross paths with him. Maybe not. Anyway, guys, I am done. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next week.